Okay, now here we are looking at the part 2 of family, and what we're going to look at predominantly here are transitions and problems within families. Now, this can be a wee bit of a sensitive issue, as often when we talk about it in family sociology, it can be a very sensitive issue because we're looking at some things that can be particularly personal for some individuals, either their own families or their own personal families. So I'm going to tiptoe around it a wee bit because being online, it's a little difficult to talk about some of these things and not knowing how people are handling it. We're also going to look at diversity in families and where the family is going in relationship to diversity. We're also going to look at and spend a fair bit of time really in this particular part on the theoretical perspectives of family. And again, I have to emphasize, this is not unlike wearing sunglasses and looking at Canadian or international families. Each set of sunglasses with a different lens for coloring will give us a different view of how those families are put together and what the purpose of family is in society. So we're going to look at those theories. And we'll look at some of the, briefly review what are some of the issues that might be a part of the future of family. And so we'll consider those issues. So some questions around what are some of the key assumptions of the functionalists? And we've already talked about some of these theories. So what would be some of the key assumptions about the functionalists looking at family? Conflict theorists, feminists, symbolic interactionalists, and postmodern perspectives when they consider family, and what significant trends affect many Canadian families today. Looking at transitions and problems in the family, this can be a wee bit of a difficult situation for some people who may have gone through some of these experiences. So I'm going to go through it, but I'm also going to, you'll notice fewer pictures in some areas because I don't want to trigger anything for some people, and I think it can be pretty important. So we're going to begin with looking at family violence and divorce. So when we begin with family violence, here's where I'm not going to be adding any pictures. Spousal abuse refers to the violence and or mistreatment that a woman or a man experiences at the hands of the marital common law or same-sex partner. This can include physical abuse, sexual abuse, economic or financial abuse. Now within this whole area of family violence can include violence against children, dating violence, same-sex violence, elderly violence, sibling violence, violence from children against parents. It's a very comprehensive and a very big area and issue. So when we think in terms of spousal violence incidents, women are essentially 5 times more likely than men to experience such violence. And many of these women live in households where children witness the violence. And so the education, if you will, of what children experience is important. Intervention. The feminist movement has done much to protect women against abuse. It's affected influence on the law and how police respond to domestic violence. It's influenced the education of an entire population on what is domestic violence and what are the appropriate things to be able to do, providing supports for persons going through these experiences. Now, the second area that many families may experience is that of divorce. Now, divorce prior to 1968 was very difficult. The only reason available prior to 68 was adultery. That is, one partner stepping out and having an affair with somebody else. In 1968, the grounds for divorce changed. The marital offenses were a part of what made that possible. Now, marital offenses could include physical or mental cruelty and adultery. Breakdown in the marriage, a couple would live apart for 3 years and then they could get a divorce. And you notice from 68 forward, there's a vast increase in the ability to get a divorce, and people took advantage of that ability to do so. In 1985, the no-fault provision was introduced. And as above, but with the breakdown of marriage, a couple needed to live apart for 1 year and then get a divorce. And this is the current legislation. And you see another bit of a boost in 1985. Now, the effects of this, About 2 million children experienced it in 2001. Most children go to the mother, and for the most children, it's difficult. Not to be with mother, it's difficult going through a divorce. Poverty, most single-parent families are headed by women and are lower income. Strained links with grandparents of the estranged partner. There is some positive, of course, and in some cases the divorce removes the child from an abusive relationship or witness to an abusive relationship. And again, I'm not going through a great deal of this. This is something that is a specialty area of family sociology, and that's where we go into these issues at a greater rate. Now we're going to look at diversity in family. Gay and lesbian, in particular the attitudinal context to understand gay and lesbian families is heterosexism, an attitude in which heterosexuality is considered the only valued form of sexual behavior, and gay men and lesbians and bisexual are inferior to heterosexual people. Over 45,000 couples have identified themselves as same-sex married or common law couples in 2006. Now, the research doesn't support that homosexual or gay couples produce or influence children in a negative way or are worse couples. In fact, that's not what the evidence and what the data suggests at all. Lesbian families, children from previous relationships or through new reproductive technologies are brought into play. Now, there's also greater diversity among singles. Singlehood, as it's being coined. We find in 1971, 50% of Canadians between the ages of 20 and 24 were married, and in 2001, only 10% were married in the same age group. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. Part of it is people are choosing to get married later. They've gone on to post-secondary education. They've gone on to get a career, want to get established, have other goals, haven't found the right partner. There's lots of reasons why people have chosen to be single longer. About 25% of households in Canada are single-person households, yet only about 10% of all Canadians will remain single throughout their lives. So why remain single? Well, for women, the choice can be career, the availability of appropriate partners without marriage, and sex partners without marriage, the belief that single life is filled with excitement, individualism, and a lack of familial attitudes. Some remain single not out of choice, but because of a lack of economic stability. And so when we look at singleton, or singlehood, it's not as uncommon as it once was. And the reasons that singlehood is occurring are for reasons that are economic, certainly personal, and having a profound impact on the direction that is in the long run. So looking at some theoretical perspectives, sociology of the family is a subdiscipline, as I've already mentioned several times, of sociology that attempts to describe and explain patterns of family life and variations in family structure. And we're going to look at the functionalists, the conflict, feminist, symbolic interactionalist, and postmodern. We'll start with functionalism. So the functionalists, the main theme emphasizes the importance of the family in maintaining stability in a society and the well-being of individuals. So the whole point is about trying to have family being that stable point, that if it's successful and stable, it influences overall society to also continue to be stable. Now, Durkheim, who was an important element of the functionalist movement, marriage he saw as a microcosmic replica of the larger society, and that the division of labor contributed to the greater efficiency in all areas of social life, including marriage and the family. And this is where the notion, from their perspective, around having men do the work outside and provide the income, and women to be involved in the household, was a part of the division of labor. Now, Parsons, another important sociologist in the area of functionalism, looked upon the family as having four key functions: sexual regulation, That is to say, the couple stays together as a family, the couple engage in sexual activity with one another and don't go outside the relationship. So it was the regulator. By being married, that was the commitment that you were making to one another. 2, socialization. And so raising kids because you were having sex and producing children meant that your job was to socialize those children, raise them according to what would be successful in any society. 3rd was economic and psychological support. You provide the income that helps maintain successfully children, and the psychological support to show that you cared about them and loved them and helped them be successful, well-adjusted people. And 4, the provision of social status. Based on where your parents are, was this kind of social status you inherited. Now, you certainly, through either your own means, education, and career, may have changed your social standing, but your family was a provider of that social standing for you. And so that was the functionalist perspective. Stable, create stability within society, divide the labor to support that stability, and provide 4 key functions of what the family does to be successful as a family. Now, not all theories follow that same line of thinking. Conflict theorists, we'll look at next, the theme here was families vie for the limited resources that are a setting for conflict and power struggles. Engels, who was an important conflict theorist, in The Origins of Family, private property and the state, where husbands were the bourgeois, the rich, and the people who had the influence, if you will, the power and the influence over the family, and wives who were the proletariat, who were more the subservient. Now that's kind of an older view, and yet I think it would depend on who you talk to as to how old that view is in today's society. Another theme was, how does class conflict affect families? So the bigger picture was, how does this conflict of scarce resources and trying to gain those outcomes of scarce resources, how does that influence the overall, economically, in say Canada, how does that affect each family? Now, the feminists have a very familiar perspective, and it's been referenced earlier in the video. So with feminist theory, we look at patriarchy. There are more types of family than the nuclear one is from the feminist perspective. There's patriarchy, which is the nuclear one, which has been a source of pain and struggle within the family for women in particular. Patriarchy is the hierarchical system of social organization in which cultural, political, economic structures are controlled by men, and women are subordinate, and it begins within the family. Now, the dark side emphasis from the feminist perspective was abuse and family violence occurs in this sort of relationship. And so it included this in the perspective is the desire to change the family system from one of control to one of freedom, maybe more egalitarian. The symbolic interactionalist, remember this is the micro version, so this is the only one that is micro, and it sees that families are socially constructed. Each family has a unique understanding as to their identity. Marriages are socially constructed to the sharing of a common reality of from 2 separate realities, the men and women. So by definition, the family is a group of interacting personalities. So how do they view family problems? Well, the use of language is important from the symbolic interactionalist. Rather than the use of term domestic violence, the better term included husband or wife abuse. Communication issues are what are very big with symbolic interactionalists. The gender differences between men and women, they differ in how they communicate with one another, and so that kind of play a role in the whole notion of what are family problems from a symbolic interactionalist perspective. And then last of the theory, we will look at postmodern. And postmodern family, they view family as very permeable. Now that's just meaning it's allowing things to come and go through it. It's capable of being diffused or invaded in such a manner that an entity's original purpose is modified or changed. Nuclear family as one form. A nuclear family is only just the one form, if you will. Urbanity is another characteristic of overlapping public and private issues regarding family, is that, today our work is so invading our private life of family that you might be working on weekends and in the evenings. And I know in my own experience, that's exactly what happens. I work at night and I work on the weekends most often. It's part of what work has become. It's that urbanity. That is that back and forth between the overlap of public and private. And so the scenario for postmodern family, well, we'll see, more women-headed and old woman alone, and technology of domestic work and paid home work, and reemergence of home sweatshops, telecommunicating, electronic cottages, urban homelessness, intense violence. They take a much more of a negative view, if you will, but they do consider the sort of influence of the modern world on people's lives. And then the last thing we'll touch on here will be looking at future of families. And in this, we're going to see that we're going to start to see an increase in family, sort of the increase in family diversity. Because of more people interacting with one another, we'll see more relationships formed out of those interactions. We'll see an increase in dual earning families, both men and women, husband and wife, both working and raising kids. We'll likely see an increase in poverty for a sizable number of children unless there's intervention. There'll be a real concern is family violence and how it will be prevented. They'll also be seeing a big increase in new reproductive techniques and how we'll play that out. Many families are sandwiched between caring for children and their elderly parents. Because Canadians marry later and have children later, they'll likely have this sandwich dynamic more. You'll see a continued decline in infertility. Most Canadians value family above all else, and so family will always be a part of society. All right, there is the end of part 2. I hope everything works out well for you, and carry on the good work. Bye for now.